Hello, today is Friday, July 18th, and welcome to episode 477 of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you quickly up to speed 3 times a week on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. I'm NSI Senior Fellow Morgan Vina, and I'm joined today by NSI Senior Fellow Andy Kaiser and NSI Fellow Jessica Jones. Earlier this month, President Trump paused U.S. military and intelligence aid to Ukraine, sparking concerns in Kyiv and with his own administration. On July 7th, that pause was reversed and aid resumed following reviews by Trump's team. Then, earlier this week, during a meeting with the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, President Trump unveiled a new strategy. European allies will purchase U.S.-made weapons, including Patriot missiles. These arms will then be sent to Ukraine, sparing U.S. taxpayers from direct funding. The plan restores NATO stockpiles and is a huge win for U.S. defense primes. Raytheon and Lockheed are reportedly doing a little happy dance. This new approach is designed for rapid delivery, offering an initial bump in shipments over the next several months. It is also a noticeable shift from Trump's previous policy, where he emphasized only defensive weapons would go to Ukraine. There is now talk of offensive weapons being sent, including long-range missiles. Watch out, Moscow. In addition to this shift in U.S. support, the president also issued a 50-day ultimatum to Russia to accept a ceasefire or face 100% tariffs and secondary sanctions on third countries purchasing Russian energy. The goal is to pressure Putin into negotiations. Putin, not one to be put in a corner, responded dismissively, condemning the tactics as quote-unquote blackmail. All right, team, what do we have here? We've got President Trump announcing a new policy here. The MAGA movement, clearly, some are very concerned, saying that this is not what they actually voted for during the campaign. And President Trump, campaigned on stopping wars, ending wars, as opposed to prolonging them. What do we make of this, Jessica?
I guess I'm going to be a little bit of a Debbie Downer this Friday. I'd like to say that this is a big change and a pivot, but we'll see, right? It seems like, again, it's about messaging and a lot of statements coming from the White House. It seems very clear that obviously President Trump is getting and is very frustrated with Putin, right? We see that over and over. He is calling him out. He says they have a lot of great talks, but then Putin goes and bombs cities in Ukraine. And so he's now at least acknowledging that. But he's just given Putin a 50-day window for a ceasefire. 50 days brings us all the way through the summer. We're hearing talks of a Russian summer offensive, like 160,000 Russian troops amassing on Ukraine's eastern border. Like that gives Putin 50 days to solidify any gains on the battlefield. It's a lifeline to Russia. I don't think Ukraine's happy about that. They would like to say a 0-day window, right? And so it seems like a lot of talk. Great that he's asking whether bombs can hit Moscow, right? Like that's a nice little leak there. But how long is it going to take until these arms get to Ukraine? It could be a while. The EU is probably a little angry. They're not getting enough credit for actually paying for these, right? Like the US is actually getting the good end of the deal there. And now we see the Hill waiting on their sanctions bill to see what happens with Trump's maneuvers, right? Like, how does this play out? And so we don't even see Congress doing anything. They're just also waiting. So it would be great if this is a pivot and the frustration leads to action, but the Kremlin does not seem worried. And it's not a good sign when the Kremlin does not seem worried.
Yeah, to say the least. Andy, building off of Jess's comments here, I mean, we saw that, Lindsey Graham has this sanctions bill. And he's actively negotiating it right now, not only with, other members of the Senate, as well as the White House. And, President Trump has said, okay, yeah, I'm going to support this, but I also want a waiver, which would essentially like defang any sanctions here, as all Hill veterans know. Does this make a difference? Or as Jessica says, like, is this just noise here? What is really going to move the needle with President Trump here in terms of actually taking meaningful action against Russia in Ukraine?
Yeah, I do think this is consistent with Russia's policy to try to buy themselves time, right? So I don't think it's changed Russia's equation on the battlefield, where unfortunately, due to superior, volumes of manpower and sort of seemingly endless lines of supply and material, where conversely the Ukrainians are sort of running short of both. You see incremental gains by the Russians. So I think, 1 day, 2 days, 50 days is all something the Russians can pocket, sadly, to continue to make, modest but gains nonetheless. As for the president, I do think the president doesn't like to be made for a fool, particularly in public. So, maybe there is, I won't call it a red line, but maybe there is, a point at which he sort of throws his hands up in the air and says, I've given you enough time. And maybe he's coming to the realization that I think all of us on this call and most of the listeners on the podcast, sort of know in our gut, which is Vladimir Putin has no interest in peace. He has interest in acquiring and holding as much Ukrainian sovereign territory as humanly possible, returning sort of Russia to its state as a global empire, which is his stated goal here. So, I'm not sure a whole lot changes. Certainly, I'm sure the rhetoric is welcome in Ukraine, but as we've mentioned, does it change the situation on the battlefield? I'm not so sure.
I did love that we learned this week that the First Lady is tracking this and is also chiming in on Putin's bad intentions.
Yes, well, as an Eastern European, I'm sure she has lots of thoughts on Russia. I will say I actually like this deal with NATO. It's a very sort of, I think, elegant solution to President Trump saying that, look, the United States is going to get the best deal here because we're not paying for this. We're getting the Europeans to pay for it. And in fact, we're actually benefiting from it because all of the stuff, whether it's offensive or defensive weaponry, is coming from the United States that NATO countries are buying and sending to Ukraine. So I actually think it's a great solution. I kind of wish that we had come up with this idea before. I am, like Andy, a little disappointed in this whole 50-day pause. I don't see what benefit that there is to it. It's not like Putin's going to change his mind. And I think Trump knows it. I think he's very frustrated. And if anything, it may actually be buying, the Trump administration time so that, we can prepare for whatever execution of a new policy approach that we want to take against Russia. So I think that is a thought. It actually buys us some space.
The most optimistic today, Morgan
I know, right? I got to make up for Wednesday, right? With that said, though, Putin is a total pain in Trump's ass at this point because, Trump thought, he could make a deal with him, and he's quickly realizing that ain't the case. And when Trump had a huge win when it came to Iran, and yet you still have Ukraine bubbling in the background, and it's kind of just like this.
But what's amazing? A couple months ago, President Trump was saying if there's no ceasefire, the U.S. might just totally disengage, right? And we talked about what would be the consequence. And here we are in the middle of summer, still deeply engaged. And so it is like we were all worried. Now we're feeling a little better. So I guess that's some positive. We're not disengaged, I guess, if I'm looking for a positive.
We're moving in the right direction. Let's put it that way. All right. That is a wrap. Thank you so much to Taylor Lane, Kelly Crowley, Claude Jennings, and the NSI staff for their help in producing today's episode. Join us on Monday, July 21st for another episode of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you smart fast on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. Fault Lines is now on YouTube, so check out our channel for today's episode and our NSI swag. If you like what you heard or saw, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe.